They rarely reach out first. Saying, "I love you" back feels delayed or never comes at all. They disappear without warning, then return as if nothing ever happened. Sighs. You tell yourself they're just emotionally distant, but that's not the full story. You found yourself loving someone who made you believe that if you were patient enough, easygoing enough, and never asked for too much, they would finally choose to stay. Sad. The reality is different. They didn't suddenly leave. They were never able to be fully present in the first place. Here's what most people never realize. They're not actually running from you. They're running from the feeling that loving someone means losing themselves. Once that clicks, everything changes. You stop chasing. You stop making yourself smaller. You stop trying to earn love. Thoughtful. Ironically, that's when you become the person they struggle to walk away from. Understanding an avoidant isn't about manipulation, mind games, or secret tactics. It's about seeing the psychology beneath their behavior. When you stop feeling like a threat to their nervous system and become someone who feels emotionally safe, the entire relationship shifts. Stay with me, because this may completely change how you look at every relationship you've ever had. If you've ever loved someone who pulled away the moment things became serious, comment the word safe. I want to know who's experienced this. Think about it for a second. Have you ever felt like you were always too much, too emotional, too available, too invested? No matter how carefully you tried to love them, the closer you got, the more distant they became. You would share an amazing conversation, laugh together, or have a moment that felt deeply connected. Then suddenly they seemed emotionally unavailable, not angry, not cruel, just unreachable. So you started questioning yourself. Did I say the wrong thing? Was I too much? Should I have backed off? Or maybe I didn't try hard enough. That exhausting cycle can make you question your own sanity. But you're not the problem. You're likely experiencing the push and pull dynamic that happens when someone has an avoidant attachment style. Today I want to talk about something people rarely discuss. I want to explore what life feels like inside the mind of an avoidant, what they secretly long for, yet fear more than anything. When you understand what's happening beneath their behavior instead of judging what you see on the surface, your entire perspective changes. You stop making their reactions about your value. And if you genuinely want to build a healthy relationship with them, not because you're addicted to the emotional roller coaster, but because you truly care, you'll understand how to show up without constantly triggering their deepest fears. So, who is an avoidant, really? Let's put aside the labels for a moment because they've been misunderstood for far too long. They're often described as emotionally unavailable, commitment phobic, or people who always keep one foot out the door. But that's not who they truly are. What you're seeing is the result of unresolved emotional survival. Avoidant attachment isn't a personality flaw. It's a protective strategy that once helped them survive. As children, many avoidants learned a painful lesson. Depending on other people wasn't safe. Maybe the adults around them were emotionally distant. Maybe their feelings were dismissed. Maybe when they cried, nobody came. When they expressed fear, loneliness, or needed comfort, they were told to toughen up, stop being sensitive, or handle it themselves. Eventually, their nervous system adapted. It learned that emotional needs only led to disappointment, so the safest solution was to stop needing anyone at all. They became independent, self-reliant, strong. They convinced themselves that if they expected nothing from anyone, nobody could hurt them again. That strategy worked for years. The child who never complained was praised. The teenager who handled everything alone looked mature. The adult who asked for nothing seemed easy to love. Their entire identity became built around self-sufficiency. Then love entered the picture. Real love asks us to depend on another person. It requires vulnerability. It means quietly admitting, "I need you," while trusting that they won't use that against you. For most people, that's simply what intimacy is. For an avoidant, it can feel terrifying. Every time genuine closeness begins to grow, their nervous system reacts as if danger is approaching. This isn't just a mindset, it's a biological response shaped by years of emotional conditioning. Their body connects intimacy with pain because that's what it learned long ago. So they do what once kept them safe. They create distance. They become emotionally quiet. They withdraw, not because they don't care. Often it's because they care more than they know how to handle. The stronger the emotional connection becomes, the louder their internal alarm sounds. And the louder that alarm gets, the more urgently they feel the need to escape. Now imagine what happens to the person who loves them. You notice them pulling away, and naturally you panic. Your own fears become activated. Maybe your past taught you that inconsistency leads to abandonment, so you reach out more. You try harder. You become even more patient, understanding, and available. But from the avoidance perspective, all that increased closeness feels overwhelming. Their nervous system interprets it as pressure. They feel trapped instead of comforted. Without realizing it, they're reliving the emotional overwhelm they experienced growing up. So they retreat even further. This creates the anxious avoidance cycle, a painful dance where one person chases while the other runs. Unless both people understand what's happening underneath the behavior, the cycle repeats until it exhausts them both. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. What does an avoidant actually want beneath all those walls? The answer is surprisingly simple. They want love just as deeply as anyone else. Not from a distance, not with conditions, not while pretending they don't care. Deep down, they want to experience complete love just like anyone else. They hope for someone who remains steady, someone who doesn't fall apart every time they need distance. They long for a partner who doesn't treat their need for space as rejection or turn every quiet moment into hours of relationship discussions. What they truly hope for is someone who is genuinely at peace, not someone pretending to be okay while secretly keeping track of every delayed reply or unanswered message. They want someone whose confidence doesn't rise and fall based on whether they receive attention from the avoidant that day. They're drawn to people who have a meaningful life outside the relationship. Someone with personal goals, close friendships, hobbies, purpose, and an identity that exists independently. Someone who chooses to be with them because their life is already full, not because they're terrified of being alone or driven by the need to chase unavailable people. That is the relationship they quietly dream about. They want someone who already feels complete within themselves, because that kind of person doesn't make love feel overwhelming. The truth is, avoidants don't dislike love itself. What they fear is the emotional cost they've always associated with it. If you become someone who makes love feel safe instead of threatening, safe to receive, safe to hold on to, safe to lean into, you offer them something they may have never experienced before. You become evidence that closeness doesn't always end in pain, that the fears they've carried for years don't have to define every future relationship. But I also want to be honest. This isn't about finding the perfect formula to make an avoidant stay. Loving them the right way isn't a magic solution. There's another part of this story that deserves just as much attention. Many people who end up in anxious avoidant relationships aren't simply unlucky. They're active participants in a familiar pattern. I say that with compassion because I've seen it happen countless times. Before we continue, if this message resonates with you, leave the word safe in the comments. It only takes a moment, and it helps Avoider reach more people who may need to hear this. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Now let's go deeper. There can be something strangely addictive about the chase, the unpredictability, the emotional highs followed by the sudden distance. Those rare moments when they finally open up can feel less like receiving love and more like winning a difficult prize. That feeling usually points to something much older than the relationship itself. For many people, love during childhood wasn't always consistent. Maybe affection had to be earned. Maybe approval depended on good behavior. Maybe emotional connection appeared one day and disappeared the next. Over time, your nervous system learned that love required effort. You had to prove yourself. You had to work for it. You had to earn it back every time it slipped away. So when someone enters your life who is warm one moment and distant the next, a familiar part of you quietly says, "This feels like love." Not because it's healthy, because it's familiar. It echoes the emotional environment you first learned to call home. That doesn't mean you're damaged. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Human beings naturally gravitate toward what feels familiar, even when that familiarity comes with pain. That's why understanding avoidant attachment isn't only about understanding the other person. It's also about understanding yourself. Why are you staying? What emotional need is this relationship meeting? What old story are you replaying? And most importantly, is that a story you still want to keep living? Now let's talk about what an avoidant genuinely imagines when they picture a healthy relationship. They don't dream about emotional distance. They dream about emotional ease. They want a relationship that feels peaceful instead of overwhelming. One where coming home doesn't immediately mean carrying another person's emotional burden. They want the freedom to spend time alone without it automatically becoming evidence that something is wrong between you. They want to love someone without feeling trapped by that love. Here's the irony. The harder you chase them, the more you reinforce their deepest fear, that intimacy always leads to losing their freedom. But when you naturally step back, not to manipulate them, but because you've reconnected with your own life, your own confidence, and your own self-respect, they often experience something completely different. They notice your absence. They become curious. They begin asking themselves questions they weren't asking before. Where did they go? What are they doing? Why don't they seem desperate anymore? Do I actually miss them? For perhaps the first time, they experience space that wasn't created through conflict or escape. It was simply given. And inside that space, their nervous system has a chance to settle. Sometimes, not every time, but often enough, they find themselves moving back toward the relationship. Not because they were pressured, because they finally had room to choose. It's important not to misunderstand this. Living in a way that supports an avoidance need for space doesn't mean pretending you have no emotional needs. It doesn't mean acting independent while silently suffering. It doesn't mean shrinking yourself until you're almost invisible. That's not emotional security. That's self-abandonment. Eventually, that kind of pretending catches up with you. The resentment builds, the pain overflows, and the relationship collapses under the weight of everything left unsaid. Real security looks very different. It means building a life that feels meaningful, whether they're texting you or not. It means your happiness isn't waiting for their next message, because you're actively living your own life. When they become quiet, you don't immediately spiral into self-doubt. You return to your own goals, your own passions, and the people who matter to you. You stop over-giving. You stop over-explaining. You stop sending endless messages trying to decode what happened. Instead, you develop genuine confidence in your own worth. And here's something many people overlook about avoidance. They're incredibly sensitive to anything that feels forced or inauthentic. They can often sense the difference between someone who is genuinely secure and someone who is only pretending to be. Their nervous system has spent years preparing for emotional danger. It's constantly watching for signs that someone will expect more than they know how to give, or that love will eventually cost them their freedom. Because of that, they're surprisingly good at recognizing when something isn't genuine. If you're acting distant only to get a reaction, they'll feel it. If you're pretending to be independent while secretly hoping they'll chase you, they'll sense the difference. They can usually tell when confidence is real and when it's simply a mask. The person they find hardest to forget isn't someone who clings to them. It's someone who truly enjoys their own life. Someone who wants them without making them responsible for their happiness. Someone who sees the relationship as something beautiful added to an already fulfilling life, not the only thing giving life meaning. That's the kind of person who stays in their mind. That's the person they often find themselves returning to, because for perhaps the first time, they experience love that doesn't demand they sacrifice who they are. There's another idea that explains so much of their behavior. Think of it as an emotional reset period. Every avoidant has one, although the length is different for everyone. It begins when they emotionally shut down, they become quiet, distant, or disappear for a while. During this phase, most partners understandably panic. They send more messages, make more calls, and repeatedly ask if everything is okay. From the avoidance perspective, every attempt to pull them back before they're ready feels like additional pressure. Instead of shortening the distance, it often extends it. But something different happens when you respond from a place of genuine security. You don't disappear to make them jealous. You don't stay silent to punish them. You simply continue living your own life. Eventually, their nervous system settles. The emotional intensity fades. They look around and notice you're not standing there waiting anxiously for them. You're simply living. That's often when curiosity begins to replace fear. They wonder what you're doing. They think about you. Sometimes they're the one who reaches out. This isn't about playing games. It's about allowing their nervous system enough space to realize that reconnecting doesn't mean losing themselves. Now let's look at some common triggers, because understanding these can prevent a great deal of unnecessary pain. One of the biggest is constant requests for reassurance. Questions like, "Are we okay? Do you still love me?" Or, "Why have you been so quiet?" are completely understandable. Anyone might ask them. But for an avoidant, those questions can feel overwhelming because their nervous system hears an expectation they fear they can't meet. Instead of moving closer, they often retreat. Another trigger is making the relationship the center of every conversation. If nearly every discussion revolves around where the relationship is going, how they feel, or what the future looks like, they can begin associating the relationship itself with emotional pressure. Instead of feeling connected, they start feeling emotionally exhausted. Escalating during their silence creates another painful pattern. They withdraw, you become more anxious, you pursue harder, they retreat even further. Before long, both people feel hurt, misunderstood, and emotionally drained. When they become quiet, what often helps most isn't more pursuit, it's respectful space. Long emotional explanations can also overwhelm them. Many avoidants didn't grow up learning how to understand or express complicated emotions. Their emotional language may be limited, not because they don't feel deeply, but because nobody taught them how to process those feelings. So when they're faced with long messages packed with emotion, they may not experience them as connection. They experience overload. Another subtle but important point involves conflict. When you're hurting, it's healthy to express that pain. The difference lies in how it's communicated. Saying, "I've been feeling disconnected lately and I miss being close to you," invites conversation. Spending a long time detailing every emotional consequence of their behavior can unintentionally flood their nervous system. Your feelings absolutely matter, always. But timing, tone, and the way those feelings are shared often determine whether an avoidant can truly hear them or whether they instinctively shut down. Now let's shift from what doesn't help to what often does. Offer space before they have to ask for it. That might sound strange, but saying something like, "I've got a busy week ahead, let's catch up this weekend," removes the pressure from them having to create distance themselves. Instead of feeling trapped, they feel respected. Take an interest in what's happening inside them without expecting immediate answers. Avoidants usually have rich inner worlds. They think deeply and often feel more than they show. Ask thoughtful questions, then allow silence. Give them time. When people feel free to answer instead of obligated to respond, they're often much more willing to open up. Consistency is another powerful source of safety. Anxious and avoidant relationships often swing between extremes. One day there's closeness, the next day conflict. One person pursues while the other withdraws. Then the roles sometimes reverse. That unpredictability keeps both nervous systems on edge. But when you're consistently calm, emotionally steady, and present without becoming overwhelming, something begins to change. Over time, they stop expecting emotional danger every time they get close. Instead, they begin to experience something unfamiliar: safety. And for someone who has spent a lifetime protecting themselves from intimacy, safety can become the first real reason to stay. Build a life that doesn't revolve around one person. Invest in your friendships, your work, your passions, your creativity, and your purpose, not to impress anyone, but because those things genuinely matter to you. When your life feels full, you naturally stop placing all your emotional weight on the relationship, and that's attractive. Avoidants are often drawn to people who have direction, depth, and a strong sense of self. When they reconnect after pulling away, don't answer distance with more distance. Don't punish them for being cold or make them earn your warmth. That only teaches them that relationships are battles. Instead, stay consistent. Let them experience that coming back doesn't always lead to conflict. But before any of this can work, you have to let go of a painful fantasy. You have to grieve the relationship you hoped you would have, the one where they reached out first, openly expressed their feelings, and intimacy felt effortless. That version may never exist with this person. Holding on to the belief that if you become secure enough, patient enough, or understanding enough, they'll finally transform, can keep you trapped in a relationship that slowly drains you. There's an important difference between understanding an avoidant and abandoning yourself. Learning healthier ways to communicate while respecting your own needs is growth. Making yourself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore, and pretending you don't need emotional connection just to keep someone close isn't love. It's losing yourself. You deserve a relationship where you don't have to earn the right to express your feelings. You deserve a connection where love doesn't feel like solving a puzzle every day. If your partner recognizes their patterns, takes responsibility, goes to therapy, or actively works toward change, then learning about avoidant attachment can strengthen your relationship. But if you're carrying all the emotional work while they remain unchanged, you're not building a partnership. You're simply waiting and hoping. Eventually, you have to ask yourself whether you're living your own life or spending it trying to fix someone else's. The truth is, avoidants can change. Not all of them will. Real change only happens when they're willing to face the fears hiding beneath their defenses. Those who become more secure often describe one thing that made the biggest difference. They met someone who didn't reinforce their deepest fear. Instead of chasing them, that person respected themselves. Instead of collapsing when distance appeared, they continued living their own life. Instead of making love feel overwhelming, they made it feel safe. That doesn't mean everything became perfect overnight. There were still setbacks and moments of fear, but little by little the alarm inside them became quieter. For the first time, they realized they could be loved without losing themselves. They learned that intimacy wasn't the same as being trapped, that staying close didn't require giving up who they were. That's what healthy relationships are really about. Not manipulation, not mind games, not pretending not to care. It's two people doing their own healing and meeting each other from a place of emotional security. That kind of relationship is worth fighting for, but only when both people are willing to do the work. So here's what I hope you remember. First, when an avoidant pulls away, it isn't proof that you're too emotional, too needy, or not enough. Their distance is usually an automatic protective response shaped by old experiences, not a measure of your worth. Second, you can't heal attachment wounds by loving harder. More effort, more chasing, or more sacrifice won't fix what only they can choose to face. Security creates change, not desperation. Third, if you repeatedly find yourself attracted to emotionally unavailable people, gently ask yourself why. That's not self-blame, it's self-awareness. Explore what old wounds make inconsistency feel familiar and begin healing your own nervous system. Fourth, know your limits. Sometimes you grow, become more secure, and your partner grows with you. Other times you do everything you can, and they still aren't ready. Recognizing which reality you're living is an act of self-respect. Finally, remember this. You are never responsible for healing another person. You can create safety, you can offer patience, understanding, and compassion, but you cannot do someone else's emotional work for them. An avoidant's deepest wish isn't endless distance. It's the freedom to love without feeling like they'll disappear in the process. When you become someone who is emotionally grounded, fulfilled, and secure, not by shrinking yourself, but by fully living your own life, you show them something they may have never believed was possible, that love can feel safe. And sometimes, that changes everything. If this message spoke to you, leave safe in the comments. Let Avoider know you're here and that you're choosing growth. No matter where you are in your journey, remember this, you don't have to walk it alone.